Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Episode. Today we're going to continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and we're going to be talking about the Nintendo 64 core today, where it's come from, where it is, and where it's going, and we're going to be addressing the big elephant in the room as far as all of your questions are concerned, and that is TLB, or Translation Lookaside Buffer. It's a big word, we're just going to call it TLB, and by the end of the video you should understand what it does, why it's implemented in the hardware, why it's not yet in the core, and why that matters. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But when you ask me to test Perfect Dark, there's a reason I don't do it yet, and that is because of the TLB. Now inside of the Nintendo 64, there's 4 megabytes of RAM, and you can expand that to an additional 4 megabytes of RAM, giving you a total of 8 with the expansion pack. But as far as memory is concerned, some games can use the Translation Lookaside Buffer to address a virtual memory address that then gets translated into a physical memory address in RAM. It gets very confusing, but I'm going to break it down into plain language. But when you guys ask about Paper Mario and I show you the intro, I tell you that you can get so far into the game, but then you're going to get a hard crash. That is because it does start using TLB at a certain point in time. I want you to understand some games use it the entire game, some games use it once, and a lot of games don't use it whatsoever. But as you see here at the top, address error on store, that is because TLB is not implemented within the core, so when it actually tries to find a memory address, it cannot because that table is not there. It has nothing to look for in the first place. Or something like Super Mario 64 where we use the no face patch. This is on emulation software on my PC, and you can see Mario's floating head right here. This is the one and only time within the game that the hardware and software are going to talk to each other and look for a memory address using TLB. And that's why we use the no face patch, so we can bypass this one instance of the game trying to use that virtual memory address spacing to be able to boot. They never use it again. Why is that? Probably because it's just a little bit of an appendix of the development process. Generally, you don't remove source code. If you don't need it, you just leave it there because removing things starts to break them. But basically what TLB is think of it like this. Go into your GPS program and enter an address. It's going to give you directions where you need to go. That's going to be the address space and the actual RAM on the MiSTer. But consider this, you don't actually enter in the address of where you want to go, you put in a friend's code and then it translates that to an address. That's why in the intro to this game, we can't see this face because when it looks up the address as to where to access something from memory, it does not exist, the table is not there, therefore the game completely crashes. Now this table isn't just a one-time hit. It works on a hit or miss basis, so it'll either find the information it wants or it will not. But imagine every single time you had to take a turn in your GPS device, you had to ping that friend code again, or a variety of that friend code, and then get a new little bit of information to give you the next turn. That is basically what TLB does. It looks up information, decides whether or not it finds it or needs to write it, and then it converts that address into a physical address. It's a translation layer that basically allows there to be different memory structures within the Nintendo 64. And that is what's not implemented in the code. You'll see here on the MiSTer FPGA core, when we're playing Goemon, we can get the whole intro loading up, but at a certain point in time, it's going to stop working. That's because as of the spreadsheet, this apparently does use some form of TLB. And the point that I'm trying to make is some games access it just a few times, some games will get into the game and not work. When we move over to software emulation that has the TLB implemented within it, we can play this game perfectly fine. So when you're wondering why you only get to see the intro of Goemon, it is because of that TLB address spacing. Let's think about it another way. Think about it if you've looked up a phone book and you were trying to find a business's phone number, but you couldn't just look up the business name, you needed to look up their address first and then find the business name. All it is doing is overcomplicating the ability for the Nintendo 64 CPU to find things in memory. Something like Castlevania 64 here in Legacy of Darkness 100% use that TLB system. That is why you haven't seen them on any testing videos yet, because that code is not implemented yet into the actual core. And I know Robert has said he plans on doing this later on, and that is because all of the fixes, all of the different cores he's been giving us improve so many games at once. The list of games that use TLB on the Nintendo 64 is not a very big list, but everyone's really curious about it and waiting for it to happen because the list list of games that do use it are some of the heaviest hitters on the platform that we still can't play. But let's take a look at Killer Instinct Gold. You guys always ask me to test this game, and it's not doing anything new than it was before, and I will leave a link to the description below, but there is a compatibility tracker where we list all of the games that work and all of the ones that don't work, and on the compatibility tracker it talks about requiring TLB on software emulation and that we get a freeze at the bottom of the tournament ladder. What I really want you to understand is the implementation of TLB within games is wildly varied depending on what you're using. Something like Super Mario 64 looks at it once and never touches it. Something like Killer Instinct may look at it more than once or in different spots. This is still MiSTer FPGA footage. You're going to see that once we get to the bottom of the tournament ladder, the game is going to freeze. But if we do something like move over to software emulation, we're not going to have that issue whatsoever. And that is why some of these games just are not working. It's a very strange system, TLB. It's basically transposing information in a virtual space to a physical space. Think of a RAM chip. There's different memory cells within there, and each one has an address. Think of your home address, but we're going to convert that over into a hexadecimal value. That is basically how RAM addressing works. When the TLB tries to access information, or when the code wants to reference TLB and it is not in the current core, the CPU does not know what to do, and you usually end up with a freeze or a halt state, or at least an error message like you see on Paper Mario that I showed you earlier. Move over to software emulation. TLB is incorporated within the package. We can play Killer Instinct on software emulation. So that is why some of these games are not working currently. TLB is apparently a very complex thing to implement, because we're not talking about one address in one space. There are multiples, and all of those multiples need to be factored in, programmed into the FPGA itself, and all of those traces in the FPGA need to be routed around so that all of that information can be accessed in a timely fashion. It's not just enough that you actually get the implementation in. The calls and responses probably have to have a certain timing so that the CPU gets the information it needs within the time frame it expects before it might go to that halt or crash state. Now, I am presuming some things about that timing. We'll see if I'm right or wrong as the code gets implemented further. But this is why when you guys keep asking to see GoldenEye tested on the Nintendo 64 testing videos, I don't even really tell you why it doesn't work. It's very complex to talk about in comments. But a game like GoldenEye is not going to come alive until TLB is implemented in the core. And I know Robert still has a lot of other things to do on the VI pipeline, things like anti-aliasing, things like the blurring image. Those are going to benefit a lot more games. We should be thankful that so few games actually use the Translation Lookaside Buffer on the Nintendo 64. That means that we have like 80% plus compatibility with the Nintendo 64 library, at least playing into the game, and that's why it's games only like GoldenEye and Perfect Dark and Conker's Bad Fur Day that aren't currently working. And it seems like Rare really liked using TLB because a lot of their games are on the list that require them and don't currently work on the core. Something like Perfect Dark, you're not even going to really get the game to boot without this implementation in there. And that is what's going to be fun as this core moves forward. Once TLB does become available, there's going to be a whole new batch of games that start working. Now, before you ask me down below when that's going to happen, I have absolutely no idea. Next week, next month, next year, never. All of those options are on the table. I just don't know, and I am definitely not going to promise you something I have no idea about. When it does become available, you're definitely going to see a video on the channel, no questions asked about that. But it is interesting how Rare seemed to use Nintendo 64 hardware features unlike anybody else. Pretty much most of the Nintendo games just work on the current iteration. Super Mario 64 obviously needs the no-face patch, but you can pop into Wave Race 64 and it has no issues whatsoever. It seems like this was a hardware function of the Nintendo 64 that existed, but even Nintendo themselves when they developed games really didn't feel the need to utilize it that much whatsoever. Or interestingly, Hudson Soft here, 2 of the 3 Bomberman games that are in 3D require TLB and don't currently boot. I'm showing you Second Attack right now. But if you want to play Bomberman Hero, I'm about 80% through the game and I've had absolutely no crashes whatsoever because that is a game that does not require the TLB, and therefore the core is never going to look for the code in the first place. But that is basically what TLB is. It's a virtual memory addressing system that looks for hits or misses and then translates those into physical memory addresses so that the CPU can load things from RAM. Without TLB implemented, the games that use it are just always going to hard crash at that point in time. But I've gotten a metric crap ton of requests and comments to talk about TLB or explain what it is, and as opposed to writing the same answer 100 times in comments, you get this video here. Short of that, I'll be back with more Nintendo 64 when we get a new core. I'll have videos throughout the week, but TLB is a pain in the butt to implement. It's a pain in the butt to talk about, but I hope you had fun. See you next time. Bye-bye.